Hi everyone, welcome to another video. Today I want to share with you how to make these mini cards. I'm going to be using some Clair stamps today. I'm actually using a Mother's Day love stamp set for these cards, but they're not going to be Mother's Day cards. So I want to show you also how to stretch your stamps a little bit. Here's a look at the stamp set I'm going to be using. Also, after the mini cards are done, I'm going to share with you how to take these designs and turn them into a full A2 sized one layer card if you wanted to. Now, like I said before, I'm using the Mother's Day Love Stamp Set. This is designed for Mother's Day, but it has some great sentiments in it that you can use outside of Mother's Day, like you give the best hugs, love you, you're perfect in every way, you're the best. So I'll be using those. For the coloring, I'm going to be using two coloring mediums. They're both from Leisure Arts. I'll be using the colored pencils from Leisure Arts as well as the watercolor pencils. So for the mini cards, I'm using 4 1/4 by 5.5 panels, and I am scoring them on the long side, and that is going to make my cards 2 3/4 inches wide by 4 1/4 inches tall. This is a really great size little mini card, and it all comes from an A2 size panel, so you get 4 out of 1 sheet of cardstock. Now I've got 2 from plain white cardstock and 2 from watercolor paper. All I do is put in my panel into my paper trimmer. You can use a scoring tool, and I score at 2 3/4, and then I just fold it over, give it a nice crease with my bone folder, and these mini cards are ready to go. Now the only thing that you need to worry about is when you have your watercolor paper that you're scoring, just make sure that you have either the textured side or the plain side, whatever one you want to work on the outside whenever you score it. So just keep that in mind with your watercolor paper. I'm using the textured side. For my stamping, all of it, I'm using the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. I have a video all about what coloring mediums work with that. I will leave that in the top right hand corner. And now I'm going to go ahead and stamp out my cards. I'm using my Mini Misty. You can use an acrylic block. It really is up to you. I just like to use this because I know I get a good stamp. Now for the first card, I'm going to be stamping the little bears, and then I've got my sentiment up in the top right hand corner. I'm going to ink these up with the VersaFine Clair ink and stamp this down a few times. Now for this one, I'm stamping on regular cardstock. Whatever you're stamping these, you need to think about what coloring medium you want to work with, what card. So for this one, I'm going to be using regular colored pencils and OMS. So I'm stamping on plain regular cardstock. My other ones that I'll be using with watercolor pencils, I'll be stamping on my watercolor cardstock. I gave that a double stamp, and now this card is ready to go. All I need to do is color it. So for my next card, I've got the little penguins, and it says, "You're the best" for my sentiment. I'm stamping this one vertically, and that one is ready to go. Next, I've got my little pigs, and I'm stamping "Love You" in the top right hand corner. This is on plain cardstock. The little penguins were on watercolor. And finally, I have the "You're Perfect in Every Way" with the little cats, and this one is on watercolor cardstock as well, and I stamped that vertically. So I'm going to start my coloring with the watercolor pencils. I have done a little bit off camera here just to get going, and to be honest, I forgot to turn on my camera. So you're going to see about not really even midway through. I'm starting off with some black on the penguins. I put a little bit of color in the darkest places, and then I use a watercolor brush or a water brush that's filled with clean water to blend that out. Now, watercolor pencils are a little bit tricky sometimes to work with if you've never worked with them before. Just practice, and it will come very easily, I promise. The best thing to learn about watercolor pencils is to, one, work in layers, and don't press very hard. The harder you press, the less your color is going to move. So just give it a light amount of pressure and then blend out. If you don't like the intensity, you can either pick up some color from the tip of the colored pencil with your brush. You can also come in on wet paper and really deepen up some areas that way. Just know that when you do that, the color isn't going to move around as well. That's why it's best to go in and play with these. Now, I have done a review for the Leisure Arts colored pencils and the watercolor pencils. If you want to know what I think of them, I will leave a link to that in the top right hand corner as well. And it just tells you all different kinds of techniques you can use with them, to just a bunch of different information in that video. So I would highly suggest going to check it out if you want. Now I went ahead and used a light blue on the little ice cap. I used blacks, less on the little penguin that's in its mother's arms, just to give it a little bit of a different look. And then underneath that ice cap and a little bit on our horizon line, I'm going to use a darker blue. Now you could see when I came in with that blue where the paper's already wet and put down that color, once I put that down, that doesn't want to move a whole lot, which is what I was going for with this. But just be aware. Also, I used my VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, which is a pigment ink, so I could have heat embossed and made this a lot easier on myself, but I kept it nice and flat. With that being said, you have got to wait for things to dry before you move on to a section next to that, or you're going to get some bleeding. It's just going to happen. It'll muddy up your colors. So you do need to give this a little bit of dry time in between your layers and in between your little sections that you're working on. So I wanted to go in and add a little color to the penguin's belly, just a very light cast, but I needed to wait until the black was completely dry or it would have just started bleeding. So that's why I did the little penguin, I did the water, I did the little background, then I can come in and do the little belly once everything else is dry, and that will finish off that card. Super simple and easy to do. There's a closer look at that. I love the way it turned out, and it's so simple to color that in. You could even make it more simple by not adding that little blue shading around the top. It really is up to you how simple you want to go with these. Now for my next card, I'm going to work with the watercolor pencils again. So I'm working on watercolor paper, and I am working on the textured side. I just find that the little bit of tooth gets more pigment from the watercolor pencils, and it also helps my color sit on top of the paper a little bit better and move around. But if you find you have better luck on the flat side or the non-textured side, by all means color on that side. And plus, stamping goes better on a non-textured side too. So that might be part of your process as well. So I'm using some browns here for these cats, and I am again just coloring them in, adding little bits of color. I'm using a few different techniques here. If I want a little bit darker where some of those shading lines are, I'll go in while the paper's still wet, or I can pick up color from the tip of the pencil and add in those darker colors. I'm using a water brush. Now these are from Arteza. However, if you don't want to order online, you can always find these at your local craft store. You can order them a ton of different places. You don't need these specifically. This is just what I have, and I do like them. They don't leak on me. All right, underneath those little cats, I added some green. I'm using more of like a little bit of dirtier, I guess you could say, more brown toned colors on this one, since I used brown in the cats. Add a little pink to the ears. And then around these cats, I am going to add that little bit of blue. I like to do this on some scenes, but again, if you're not comfortable with this or you don't like the look of it, by all means skip it. Now for this, I'm using a very light blue. I'm using circular motions, placing down a very, very, very little amount of color. I'm barely pressing here. And once that's all down, I'll come in with my water brush with quite a bit of water, making sure that all those areas are dry before I do this. You can even use a heat gun if you need to. And then I will blend that out with my water brush. And I'm focusing more on the lines that are on the outermost portion. The shadows towards the actual objects, those you can leave a little darker, just soften up those edges, and that'll really help with the look. There's a closer look at that image all colored up and ready to go. And now it's time to move on to the colored pencils. I'm going to show you one final look at these watercolor cards though, because they're so stinking cute. All right, let's move on to the colored pencils. Now for this, I am going to use the colored pencils, and I'm going to use my OMS Gamsol, whatever you want to call it, and I'm going to blend that out with some blending stumps. So I have this huge thing of OMS. Here's a look at mine. You can buy this from a lot of different artist supply stores, and I put mine in this little bitty glass container. This is actually for doing acrylic nails. Um, Once upon a time I did those, but I put mine in there, and then when I'm done, I can just wash that out. So I don't keep it in an open space. I've always got a lid on it, because if you are, it doesn't give me headaches, but it might give you headaches. So use it in a well ventilated space. Also, I'm using my blending stumps. Again, these are pretty cheap. Um, and that OMS is cheaper too. And I have had that bottle since I started crafting 10 years ago. So it's lasted me that long. And if you know me, you know my videos. I color a lot with colored pencils. They're one of my favorite coloring mediums. They do take a little bit longer. However, I really like the look of them, especially when I'm blending them out. So for this little pig card, I stamped it horizontally, and I'm going to start coloring this in. Now in this Leisure Arts, there is only one pink. So to get around this, I'm going to go ahead and color that bigger pig pink first. That was a mouthful. And then for my little second pig, I actually added in a little bit of peach to that pink, and you can get some good blending here and some good color mixing that way. So I blended that out with my OMS. I'll come in and add a little bit of shading where I want it, and I'll keep blending. And here's a closer look at how that turned out. You can see it turned that a little bit of a corally pink color, so you've got a little bit of differentiation there. So even if you only have one color of pink, one color of brown, just by adding in and mixing in those colors, you can get some great effects with that. Now underneath the pigs, instead of green, I'm going to add some brown for some dirt here. And then these also have some little bushes behind them, so I will add some green to those and blend those out. Now, as you're looking at your picture, you might notice a few spaces that you miss here and there. Just go back and fill them in. I did this here. I missed a little pig arm on one spot, so I just came in and added a little bit of pink to fill that in. Now, for coloring with the colored pencil, sometimes you don't get the exact color that you see on the tip of the pencil. So I would highly suggest testing these out before you bring them to your paper. Also, if you are blending with OMS, test it out and blend it before you bring it to your paper, because sometimes just by blending it, you can get quite a bit of a lighter color than you normally would. I'm also on this particular one, I'm going to add a little bit of blue around these little guys. So I came in, added in circular motions that blue color. Then I'll come in and blend them out. Again, I'm going to focus on the edges of these. And you might see whenever I blend this and as I'm going along coloring, that OMS wets the paper and kind of gives it a funny halo. This will dissipate and dry really quickly, and you won't have any of that. You'll just have a nice color. There you can see once that dries, you've got a beautiful softly blended edge, and all it took was some colored pencils. It seriously is that easy. It's one of my favorite watercolors, and one of the first ones I started out doing 10 years ago because I could buy colored pencils so cheap. Alright, next up I'm going to do my last card, which is my little bears. This is the scene that I'm going to take over to my A2 card size. I know mini cards aren't everybody's cup of tea. These are more tailored for like kids and lunchbox notes and that kind of thing. You can also pop these in like a vase of flowers if you want to take them to somebody that's sick. Tape them on top to maybe like a casserole or some cookies or a muffin. And that is an easy way to give somebody a card along with a gift. These also are great for lunchbox notes. Like I said, these are the perfect size, and just a little lunchbox note in your kid's lunch or a grandkid's lunch. They really brighten up a day. My son always loved them, and next up my daughter is going to get them too, so that'll be fun. Now for this, I came in and I added some dark brown and a little bit of lighter brown. Then I'm going to take another lighter brown and carry that over to the little bear. Now that just allows me to have some differentiation between the two little bears. Using two different colors, even though they're the same animal, really helps see that there's two animals instead of it just looking like one big brown blob. Now for the little flower, I used some pinks that I used on the feet to carry that across the card. And finally, I'm going to add a little bit of green right under the bears. and blend that out again, focusing on the edges and blending it out towards the right hand side. And that will finish that card off. I didn't add any blue to this one. I left it as is, and I really like the white space in this one. There's a closer look at that colored image. You can see you get some great shading, you get some great white spots. I love coloring with colored pencils. And to be honest, I am not that great with watercolor pencils, but I do have to say these were actually pretty easy to work with. And the scenes I came up with and colored, even though I've only colored with watercolor pencils a total of like 10 times maybe, they didn't turn out horribly, so I really like them. All right, now moving on to a full A2 size card to show you how to turn these scenes into a larger card if that's more your thing. I'm going to start off with the bears in the bottom right hand corner. This is an A2 top folding card base, so it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm using my creative corners here to go ahead and line up that you give the best hug sentiment. That makes sure it's nice and straight. It's one of my favorite little tools in the creative corners, so I can bump that up, make sure it's nice and straight, and I don't have to mess with grid lines because sometimes those make my eyes go like cross-eyed trying to look at those things. So that really helps me out. I'm going to color up these little bears pretty much the same way I did the other bears on the card. I'm just using more of a reddish brown tone for the smallest little bear in this. I felt like the other one blended into the mom's tummy a little bit too much, so I'm going to switch it up and make it a little bit more red color. I'm using the same colors here for the bear. I put a really dark line around the portions that I want to shade. Then where I want a little bit less color, I'm going to come in with some lighter circular motions. And that's just my way of doing it. Again, I really suggest playing around, finding what techniques work best for you and your coloring style. And this is really easy and simple to do. You can even just scribble down color. You don't have to worry about shading or adding white space or any of that. You can scribble down some color, blend this out, and it'll look like you spent 5 hours on it. All right, I added the brown. I'm going to go ahead and blend that out. I added some pinks to the little ears. I will also add some pink to the little toes and the cheeks as well. I'm using magenta for that flower. I'm blending all that out. Then I'll come in and I'm going to add that green underneath. Now this would be very cute with the coloring as is. I'll actually add a little bit of blue around this one though, just because this is such a larger card. Even though it's one layer and very clean and simple, I want to fill in a little bit more of that white space. So I did add the blue and just very quickly blended that out. I kept it more of a square little scene here. Now to add just one little final touch of, I find if you add another texture to simple one layer cards, that can really help push it over the edge a little bit. So that's what I'm going to do here. I've got these cloud die cuts. These are from Tailored Expressions. I don't think they're made anymore. I will link everything down below that I've used on these cards. However, if something isn't available, I always try and find something very similar to what I used. So I'll leave that link down below. Now to glue these on, I cut them from white felt, and all it takes is a pass through, once through, then back, then through, then back again. So twice through your machine, front and back. And these cut out perfectly from some white felt that I just buy from my local craft store. You can buy more expensive felt if you want, but I found the cheap stuff works just fine for me. Now to glue these on, you need a strong glue and you need a liquid glue. I'm using glossy accents here. I just placed those down, gave them a good push, and now those things are going to stick and they won't be going anywhere. That finishes off that card. It was that simple. It's nice and flat. It's going to go through the mail super easily. And if you wanted to, you could even leave those clouds off and make it more simple. There's a final look at the full card and also a close-up of that colored scene. I just love the way it turned out. I'm also going to give you a final look at all the cards put together. You've got your mini cards, and you've also got how you can take any one of those scenes would work for a larger card and turn that into a full-sized card. That does it for me today. I want to thank you guys for watching. As always, there are links on the left side of your screen you can click on. And any questions about supplies, or if you want to know what I use, they're always linked down in the description box below. Thanks for watching and happy crafting.